So I believe I'm kicking us off if I have my notes right, Andrea. I just wanted
go for it.
Saying that this is an initiative, this workshop is being provided under the umbrella and sponsorship of the American Folklore Society's committee, Media and Public Outreach Committee. And so we have several sub-aims of that committee, one of them being to encourage folks to use social media to both engage with the society and engage the public and explaining, getting folklore out there, letting people know what we do in our professions, in our research. And so Andrea and I are co-chairs of the social media subcommittee. So to get us started, this session is actually centered on, it's a primer for folks who have a very limited experience with social media. So for some of you who are using social media, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook for a while now, a lot of this is going to be knowledge you already know. So part of 6 is Andrea and I and our social media subcommittee recognize that Twitter in particular, but social media as a whole, are an excellent way for folks to engage with the society remotely, especially during quarantine, and especially if you, sorry, my cat's tail is recorded for all posterity. It's a way to engage with, like I said, the larger society as well as the general public. And it's a way to actually do, provide a service for our society in a sort of passive way while enjoying social media and scrolling through your news feeds. Because, for instance, with like Taylor Swift's album launch, that was an opportunity for folks to sort of glom onto that hashtag and actually educate people who were just now getting really excited about the word folklore, about how we as the discipline actually understand, study, and define folklore. So, so again, this is a primer. This workshop is meant to be for folks who want to start from the ground up, but we welcome all who are here. So before we move into Twitter, this session is going to really focus on Twitter, and we'll talk about why. I wanted to just go over some more general social media platforms to provide some degree of literacy for folks to know that there are a lot of social media platforms out there and why, what do they do, why are there so many different ones? If I want to get started, which one should I look at? So countless new apps, and by apps I mean applications, and social media sites are created at all the time. They have varying degrees of popularity and they cater to varying audiences. You have Facebook, which has a wide swath of users, and then you have more community specific platforms that have more specific audience. And even then, those platforms can evolve depending on who uses it. So for instance, I don't list it here, but we have Discord, for instance, that started out as a platform primarily used by gamers online to communicate, but it has become a platform that's actually used by all kinds of people in a manner very akin to Slack or other networking social media platforms. Another example of a sort of lesser known social media platform is called Amino, and I believe it started for sort of niche fandoms, particularly like with anime, and there's like individual channels depending on your fandom, and that's actually widened to include lots of channels catering, for instance, to covens or all kinds of communities. So it can be overwhelming with the number of platforms that are out there, but this chart right here are some of the more common ones that you will encounter. And the biggest thing I want to point out is that each platform has a different use. It has different capabilities, and therefore also has different audiences. And also, and I say this as a millennial, just as an FYI, that they have different included what my understanding of the audiences are, But I also, again, I'm not a Gen Zer, so I don't actually really know what Gen Z kids think are cool. But for instance, we're going to talk a lot today about Twitter. And so Andrea will explain in more depth what kind of media you share with Twitter. But Twitter more generally caters to an older audience, adults. Facebook, unlike Twitter, provides more options for what you can share and how you share. So you can do more long form posts, you can more easily do videos, you can manage your brand through having brand pages. And while Facebook used to be really popular with teenagers and college students, it started out as a platform for college students, hence the name Facebook, which I think is a dated term for younger kids these days who don't remember that colleges used to create Facebooks of their students. So while it started out for college students and a younger audience, nowadays it's not really the social media platform that younger people are flocking to. A lot of people have one because it's how they keep up with maybe their older family members or their work colleagues, but it's not where the younger kids are hanging out. Instagram is a platform that is primarily visual. So it's important to note that social media platforms are typically divided into two different categories. Either they're catering more specifically to messaging and talking with friends, or they're oftentimes catering more to sort of visual media, so sharing images or videos. And so Instagram is that iconic example of sharing images, although you can also show videos as well. And Instagram is primarily, I would say, used by sort of that 30-something generation. While it's primarily visual, there is a trend of using really long sort of story-like captions that have been really pioneered by different quote unquote influencers. So you can have sort of a larger narrative structure with Instagram, but it's still primarily visual. YouTube, on the other hand, I think appeals to folks of all ages. There's actually even, I've just listened to a podcast very recently about children's YouTube and some of the issues concerning that, because a lot of content creators have actually pivoted to catering to children because it's a lucrative market. And that can be problematic actually, because a lot of folks aren't necessarily, they don't necessarily have the training to be content creators for children. But that's all to say that YouTube really caters to all kinds of audiences. And as you no doubt know, centers on video or oftentimes music with a static image attached. Snapchat, you may have heard of Snapchat. Snapchat, I think, is used less by companies, for instance. So there are some companies that have ventured that way, but Snapchat is another platform that's meant primarily to be visual. But Snapchat's big stick is that your images are temporary. So you post an image or a video, and after the viewer looks at it, it disappears. So that's their appeal. And it's my understanding that that's still really only popular with sort of teens and young adults. So that is, again, one of those platforms that's kind of on the way out, I think. Pinterest, just to give you another example of a broad swath of social media, is actually an image-based platform where you basically curate pins of images that can lead to links, but basically it boils down to vision boarding with images. And I put young adults, sort of that 20-something, 30-something generation, but Andrea pointed out, I forgot that it is very popular, for instance, with quote unquote mommy bloggers or people who are preparing for weddings or collecting recipes. So I think that sort of young adult to adult audiences. And interestingly enough, I have seen organizations tapping into Pinterest. So for instance, the Kentucky Arts Council actually has a Pinterest page where they curate images of Kentucky culture. I've seen, so for instance, Savannah, Georgia also did a contest where if you created a board with different images and they picked the best one and that person won a trip to Savannah. So there are ways that organizations are tapping into that, but it's, I think, less it's more underused than Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. And I just wanted to mention, because it's in the news right now, if you don't know what it is, I wanted to talk a second about TikTok, which is very popular with teens and young adults. I believe TikTok started called Music, and it was originally meant for folks to create videos where they were lip syncing and dancing to music that was already recorded. And one of the appeals of TikTok was that you could take someone on recording and then remix it with your own sort of image or dance. And so it's evolved beyond just lip syncing, though that's still a significant amount of content on TikTok, but its appeal is it's short videos of all kinds of content. It's almost like video memes, because a lot of the content is riffing off of previous popular content or in dialogue with previous. But it's increasingly actually become it's become a hub for younger activists as well, to get the word out about Black Lives Matter and other movements. So again, that's more of a teen, young adult audience. Again, this is a primer for folks who are just dipping their toe into social media. There are other platforms out there, but as the next slide will show, I recommend sticking with, and Andrea, if you could flip that slide. I recommend for now, if you're getting started, starting with Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Primarily, that's because those are the most popular. If you're worried, there's a very real concern about privacy issues with apps. Anytime you sign into a social media account, you are by nature giving them information, and because platforms, nothing is free. So what are you paying with? You're paying with your data. And I would say that part of the value in sticking with more popular platforms, besides the fact that that's where everybody is that too, it's also, I think apps are held more sort of to the fire. You have a better idea of how they're being held to account for how they're handling their data. So when you so if you're trying to access social media through a mobile device, for instance, and you go through the app store and you're not sure about the app, I would pay attention to who the developer is, or ask someone if they've used this app. I'm also just a cautious person in that way, but I just want you to be aware that there's dozens and dozens and dozens of kinds of social media out there, but we're sticking with the more well-known. And part of that too is because this session is really about engaging with the society and promoting the discipline of folklore. And AFS is going to be one of your primary partners in that, sharing content with AFS or helping to share AFS's content to your networks. And AFS primarily uses Facebook and Instagram. So we'll talk about this towards the end. We have the opportunity through this social media subcommittee to provide more detailed workshops and webinars down the road. If there are more specific issues you would like us to tackle, maybe for instance, how public folklorists could use this for their organizations. But for now, this session, we're going to talk about Twitter. I'm going to hand it over to Andrea. But Twitter, I think you will see, will provide a good lens for how you could engage with other social media. A lot of concepts with Twitter, like the idea of hashtags, that you can translate to other social media platforms. So without any further ado, Andrea.
Thank you so much. It's a great introduction. So yes, I'm going to talk to you today about Twitter. So this is where we kind of decided to start as a committee, because for a lot of different reasons. But as Jen mentioned, we're really happy to do more intense dives in the future. So we decided to start with Twitter because it's pretty easy. It's pretty effective. So there's a pretty low learning curve on it, but it's also very effective. And you can actually kind of come up with a lot of information very, very quickly. A lot of other people are using it. So if you haven't looked at the hashtag for AFS, it's AFSAM20. You can look at that on Twitter under the search function and see what everybody's saying. And it's pretty great, actually. I love it because I can also see what's going on in sessions I'm not in. So I'll kind of know what else is happening at AFS, or sometimes people will even be like, hey, there's a bunch of us that are going to go out to dinner, or something like that when we're actually face to face. So it's pretty great to watch during the actual event itself, but otherwise, Folklore Thursday is a hashtag too that a lot of people are using. And that didn't start with AFS. That actually started with some people over in the UK that were just interested in folklore and started posting about it on Thursdays. But it's kind of expanded out to the point where a lot of other people use it, but also it's not just really confined to Thursdays. Like I tag things Folklore Thursday all the time, regardless of the day of the week. So it's kind of grown a little bit larger than the actual day of the week. It's also really, really great to stay connected throughout the year. And this is something I was talking with a lot of people about too. I think a lot of us who are one of the only folklorists at a place, we love AFS so much because we get to see each other and we get to talk, and we miss that interaction throughout the rest of the year. So having social media is a great way to kind of bring that connection back together and give you that AFS feeling without actually being at AFS. So I think that's another great reason for it. And I also have it out there too, because it does lead to other opportunities. And when I first got on Twitter, I was not a big fan of it. I'm still a little iffy on it some days, but I've gotten a lot of opportunities because of Twitter. So because of the things I've tweeted, I've been asked to do lectures. I've been asked to go places. So that's really exciting for me because I get to do things I might not have had the opportunity to do otherwise, because people who wouldn't know who I am otherwise or what I do, I jump on, I meet new people, they start following me, they're like, hey, we're having this event, do you want to come speak at it? So there's actual opportunities, and I've gotten several of these just from being on Twitter. So I think that's another really good reason, especially if you are just establishing yourself, but also if you're heading into retirement age and you're like, man, I really wish like I could teach a little bit more, or something like that. I've also been brought into other people's classes, and I've communicated with their students on Twitter too. So it's a nice way to kind of bring folklore into your everyday life and folklorists into your everyday life too. So let's talk about it just a little bit. So we have a how-to guide. It's been going into the chat over and over. So please feel free. That's going to teach you how to actually sign up. That's great. No, TJ, that's a great call out. I'm glad you're doing it. But it'll actually teach you how to sign up for Twitter in case you don't have that, kind of set up yet. So let's just start a little bit about talking about how to be effective on Twitter. And I'm more than happy, people at the end, please jump in and also give your suggestions. These are just my suggestions. And we'll take questions too at the end too, and comments and everything. So I wanted to start with just basic terms in case you're not familiar, if you've heard these terms and you didn't know what they meant. So the first one is tweeting, and that's what you do on Twitter, you tweet. You do not twittering, as my mom likes to call it. So as an example, hey, look, I just tweeted for the first time. So that's what you call what you do on Twitter. There's also retweeting. So that's when you take somebody else's content and you share it. And you can do that with or without comment. And I'll get into that a little bit more later on. But it's a really, really easy thing to do. So you don't actually have to say anything of your own. You can just broadcast other people's stuff too, which is a really easy way to kind of get other people's work out there. Hashtags, I'm sure everyone is familiar by this point with hashtags, but just in case, that's how you find stuff on Twitter. Because I've gotten a lot of people who first get on there and they're like, I can't find anything. I don't know what I'm doing. And hashtags are a great way to find that stuff. So the hashtag for AFS, I've been following it. I just constantly refresh it and see oh, what are people saying about AFS right now? And that's how you find that stuff. So I gave you the example, I'm killing it. Hashtag killing it, of course. So you can really find things that way, but then people can find you that way too. So that's the other important aspect of it, is it's a way to find people and get found. You've probably also heard of the term DMs, that's direct messages. So people can actually contact you directly on Twitter. And that's actually a pretty great thing, because there's a lot of times, especially I'm also a co-editor. So sometimes I have the connection with somebody on Twitter, but I don't have their email. So I'll just send them a DM on Twitter and be like, hey, I need your email, or hey, here's this thing. And it's easier to get things around that way sometimes. And then of course there's threads, and threads are kind of where you kind of just string together a bunch of tweets to create a narrative. And we're going to get more into that too, and how to do that effectively in a little bit. So a good tweet, I think, should be intriguing, should be brief. You only have 280 characters, which is actually a really cool thing. I really didn't like it at first, but it really taught me how to be very concise. It taught me how to get my point across, and it also taught me some tricks about, how to shorten what I say. So that was actually a really good exercise, so learning how to be brief. You should also be engaging to some extent. You want other people to respond, I also think it's really important to be honest and genuine, because I think a lot of us think about this as being a persona, of course, that we're putting forward. But that persona for me on Twitter is me. It's just basically who I am. And I think that is what makes it work. I think if you're trying to actually put something out there that isn't you, it's not gonna work. So I think to some extent, to be the most effective, it's at least gotta be a little bit you too. So that's part of what I'm gonna say. I'm gonna give you some guidelines, but ultimately be yourself on there, because that's how it works, right? You're supposed to actually kind of be yourself there too. So I don't want you to underestimate the power of a tweet. I think people blow off social media and think it's not that important, but I'm gonna give you an example. So this is just something that I retweeted. I love the TV show Lovecraft Country, hashtag Lovecraft Country. And so I follow that, especially after every episode. I like to look at it. And the first episode of it, it is a great show, by the way, because it really does tackle a lot of racial issues in America right now, but it does it in the context of a show about horror and a lot of other different things and sci-fi. But in the first episode, they had this whole, one of the big themes of it was Sundown Towns, and this whole concept of Sundown Towns. And it was put historically, but then a lot of people online started talking about this and saying no, this is still a thing. Sundown Towns are still a thing. So they started actually making, it was first a database, but it started with people's tweets, right? And so people made this database, which turned into a map, which is now easily shareable, and it's all over the place. So you can actually go to this map online and find out where the sundown towns still are in the US, which is disturbing on a lot of levels, but very good information to have. So I think that's really interesting. It really shows you how one little thing can really explode on the internet, or go viral, if you will. So this person ended up just initially engaging the fans of the show, then the others who retweeted her. And of course, everyone who retweets her isn't necessarily a fan of the show, so you're expanding that out to other people. The tweet became popular enough that the actors and the directors and the producers of the show saw it, and they started retweeting it. So it was even people that weren't interested in the show at all that might have started into that. So the more it got retweeted, the more people got involved. And I think that's really interesting, because it actually extended far out between people who actually watched the show. So that became a really viral tweet, and it became really, really important. And I think it gives important information. So that's something to think about when you're tweeting, is that sometimes these things aren't just a tweet. Just like things aren't just folklore, they're not just tweets, right? They actually show a lot about what's happening in culture and what's happening in society. I also am a big fan. I should say I'm a big fan. I used to hate self-promotion until I started reframing it as a feminist activity. And once I started rethinking about it as being something feminist and something that especially my male colleagues were doing and they didn't feel ashamed of, I started being more of a self-promoter. And I think you should be too. I think everyone should be a self-promoter. There's nothing wrong with showing your expertise on your profile or your pinned tweet. So on your profile, you can kind of see mine there. If you want to move your little window of people, it's kind of blocking my view, but hopefully it won't be blocking yours. But I say right away, I'm a folklorist, because that's the first thing I want people to know about me. I say that I'm a professor. I say that I'm an author. I list my books. I talk about what I'm interested in. I put down more recently that COVID-19 folklore is something I'm interested in. Before that, I used to say that I was a fan of the odd and unusual, which is also very much me. So I'm talking about myself, but I'm also showing my expertise. And then you have what's known as a pinned tweet. So you can have a tweet that's really important or something you really like, and you can pin it to the top. And you can only do this with one, and you can change it all the time, depending on what you want. But you can put that there. So for me, it's that, you can download my book for free. So that's a good thing. That's something I want to share with people. But otherwise, I might actually pin other things up there. So if I want to promote my book, I could also pin it there. And this is kind of a form of promotion as well. And I do think it's all in how you want to project yourself, right? And I believe in being genuine in that projection. So however you want to project yourself, do that. But think of self-promotion as a feminist act, because it is. So I do purely attention-getting tweets all the time. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think to me, that is all about engagement, right? And that's trying to get people to talk. So I did this with this, this one thing about the uncanny valley. It was just a little blurb that somebody else had posted and I retweeted it. And I was just like, hey, just a thought. And it actually ended up being this really interesting conversation about like evolutionary biology and a couple of other things, which was fun. It was actually a really fun thing to sit down and talk about. But I didn't say a whole lot in that first tweet. I was just like, hey, here you go, everyone, like have fun with this. And it works, right? It works because people retweeted it, I got more likes, and that's great. But it's more about getting the idea out there and getting that conversation to start happening. So you can complicate these things all in threads. And that's the big thing to remember is your first tweet should always be like attention getting tweet, like, hey, look over here. And then you can get more complicated, more subtle as you go through the thread. And again, this engaged people who didn't even know me because I used hashtag folklore and hashtag folklore Thursday. So these might not be people who would ever follow me in a million years, but they like folklore Thursday, or maybe they just like Taylor Swift's folklore. I don't know. But they're now people that ended up following me because they liked what I had to say and they liked what I had to share. So that's a really great way to kind of do that. And I think you should hashtag everything that you put out there in some way or another, unless you just want it to be a purely personal thing. So I'm also a big fan of joking around, as everyone knows who's been around me for like more than 5 minutes. So go ahead and make jokes. It's okay. This one was something that it was a retweet I put out there. It was a comment during a lecture I gave at a Supernatural convention, which was actually really fun. And I got that gig at the Supernatural convention because I was on Twitter. And I also got paid for that gig. So there's another reason to be on Twitter. But someone retweeted, again, someone who would never know me otherwise, but went to this Supernatural convention and making this joke and, you know, calling it a drinking game every time that I said the word experience. And it was like, it's funny because I did say experience a lot in that, like, that's what I was talking about. I was talking about supernatural experience narratives. So I said the word experience a lot. It was it was a complimentary tweet. He was enjoying it. So I, of course, like had to make the joke, like, don't do that, you'll die, right? Don't drink every time I say experience, you will die. So that though, but it's a good engagement, and that's a powerful influence, I think, and it's a positive influence, right? So this guy who never probably heard of me before that day has now had an interaction with me that was positive and that was fun, and that might make him more open to folklorists in general, not just me, right? And more open to the other things that I tweet because now he follows me. So that's kind of what I like. This is why you want to kind of establish this. To me, this isn't about you. This is about folklore, right? This is about getting folklore out there. So I also think it's fine every once in a while to be a little sarcastic or curmudgeonly. I think that's all up to you. I do it occasionally. So this was a retweet that someone had originally tagged me in, and then I retweeted it. And so I did a mildly sarcastic comment, but I did it in a form that is pretty common. It's part of folk speech, is the stares in. And so I did stares in academic here for this about my own research, because it's someone saying like, why is no one talking about the anti-vaccination movement? It's like, we are. So it also does help that one of my friends made a more sarcastic comment afterwards. I think that alleviates my sarcasm a little bit. But again, it all depends on the presentation of self. I have some friends on there that do a great job of being sarcastic. And they pull it off because that's kind of who they are, right? So I think it is whatever feels right for you. And I also think fighting when you think it's necessary is totally fine. I have had a long-standing feud with Aaron Mahnke, which I think has been really well known. I call him out on his bullshit. Sorry, I do, because a lot of times he's very sexist, and he is very he has a bad tendency to say that oh, look at this unusual thing that white people do and this really weird thing that black people do, and that really pisses me off. So I call him out on it all the time. So yeah, I called him out on this, and then this essentially was me being again, sarcastic, but saying, hey, you're trying to simplify this, and boy, do I have the entire discipline of folklore to tell you about. And he does actually a great job of diffusing me here. And that's also why I wanted to show this, because I am being I am being sarcastic. I am being curmudgeonly. I am calling him out. And he does a great job of diffusing me though. Look, he was like, I'm very open to hearing how incorrect I am. I love learning. And I was like, damn it. Okay, fine. Don't fight with me. But then I sent him a bunch of links to things that he probably never read, but it's fine. And then of course, it also helps to have your friends jump in. So thanks, friends. And I will do this on other forms of social media. Some of you have probably seen me do this. I'm like, hey guys, there's a fight on Twitter. And I'll say this on Facebook and be like, join me on Twitter. So I also use, I cross-pollinate my, my social media. So I think that's also a cool thing that you can do too, is kind of get people, kind of remind them, hey, look, there's something happening. Like, come over here and help me, like help back me up. So I think fight when it's necessary, but you don't have to make it a habit unless you want to be that person, and that's fine. Like, you be you. But I think it's better to have a more positive attitude. I think that actually brings people to folklore better than having a not so positive attitude. Also, don't feed the trolls. This is one of my favorite trolling points. I wrote something for Folklore Thursday, and someone just responded. It was like, can't believe in Slender Man, make him real. And someone's like, no. I was like, wow, that's some really low level, lazy trolling right there. I'm like, you know, you could have tried a little harder maybe, but people want to antagonize you on the internet, just ignore them. They're doing this, like, you giving them anything is feeding the trolls. Don't engage. Like, this person and I were not going to have a useful conversation. There are times when I have had useful conversations with people, but you can usually tell pretty quickly if you're going to have a useful conversation with someone or not. So I also like to point out that, as I mentioned previous, friends and colleagues help, so help them out too. Tim Thurston was very nice to actually frame my book in the context of something. So he was talking about Trump pushing the blame China narrative, and then promoted my book, which was very, very nice of him. Thank you. And this is something I do a lot too. And it's probably one of the biggest things I do on Twitter is give people references. So I'm constantly doing that. So one Folklore Thursday, the theme was fairy lore. So I was like, cool, here's good books on fairy lore, like good academic folkloric books on fairy lore. And I didn't say that. I was just like, hey guys, look at this cool book. Hey, look at this cool book. So I do a lot of that. And I think that's great because it also gets other people's books out there. So I gave them The Good People, which is Peter Navarro's book. I also gave them Barbara Rietti's Strange Train. So I think that's great too, because that actually gets people reading those books too. And that's what we want, because if they read those books, then they're going to learn more about folklore. So hopefully they're actually going to at least pick them up or read them. Maybe we'll just get a little bit of extra money because they'll buy them and never read them. Who knows? But hopefully we'll get that word out there that we exist, right? Because a lot of people don't realize we exist as a discipline. So that's a lot of what I do on Twitter, is just being like, hey, I'm a folklorist and that's a thing, right? I have a PhD in folklore and that is a thing. This is not just stuff people make up. This is an academic study. So if you want to follow someone, I'm giving you the instructions on this here. So that little purple arrow shows you the exact spot where you hit to follow somebody. So I have it on the American Folklore Societies because that's who you should follow first. So there it is. And then I also have that you can get alerts. So this is really, really useful because I have an alert every time the American Folklore Society tweets something. Little thing beeps on my phone. I pick it up. I'm like, ooh, AFS tweeted something. Retweet. I automatically retweet just about everything AFS puts out there because I want that information out there in the world. So that's a really simple, easy thing to do. And this is an easy way to kind of keep up. So you don't have to follow everyone or get a notification for everyone. You can just kind of let those things in the background. But certain people like AFS, I always have that one on so that I know every time AFS tweets. And then of course, if nothing else, retweet. That is a big thing. Like I said, I retweet everything AFS puts out there. And I also have sort of you can make lists, and we can get into that another day, but you can make lists of people too and just follow certain people. So if it's someone you trust and you want to retweet them, you can just kind of retweet them and keep that, that notification if you want it there. Again, I was kind of mentioning retweeting and commenting. So you can comment on your retweets if you want to. So you just hit retweet. If you don't want to comment, so you can kind of see at the bottom there, it shows you retweet or quote tweet. Quote tweet is what you want if you want to make a comment. So then you can kind of put your own information on there. So like a lot of times when it's AFS, if I retweet, I might be like, this is a really important initiative, or hey, you guys should check this out, or something like that, that gives them a little bit more detail or tells people why they should look at it. I don't always do that. Sometimes if I'm busy, I just retweet and just put it out there. But if I can contextualize it, I try to. So that's an important thing to do. Or you can add what your own thoughts on there too. So if you're like, you know, hey, I also wrote a book about this, or hey, there's these other people who wrote about this and you should check out their work, you can do that as well. We're going to talk a little bit more about hashtags. So best ways to find information, and these are the most common ones that are used by folklorists. So AFSAM is obviously just for this conference. Next year it'll be AFSAM 21. This year obviously it's 20. Ask a Folklorist is another one that goes around a lot. AFS 365, Folklore, Folklore Thursday, and Folklore Every Day are some of the other ones. But there are some other ones out there too, and you guys can tell us about it a little bit more at the end if you want, or put them in the chat. So these are the ones that are most common. So if you want to try to find things that are happening in folklore, that's one of the best places to do it. Then the direct message. So I've given you the little purple arrow again, so you know where that button is. So you can contact people. And this is a great way to connect with people. And it's also a way that they can find you and send you messages. And you can set up different preferences for this, and we can kind of talk about this, about how people can reach you or not reach you, or see your tweets or not see your tweets. I have all my stuff open so that people can message me if they want to. And so far it's been fine. I haven't gotten too much spam that way, and I haven't gotten too many haters too much, but it does happen occasionally, but I can just ignore it. And then here we get into threads. So I'm picking on Jeff Tolbert today because he's really, really good at this. These are great if you want to say more than you have room. And I actually didn't put all of Jeff's here, but Jeff is so good at this because he actually does them so that each one is like a standalone tweet, but they still all go together. I am not that good at this. So this is one where he kind of started with about the academic folklore discipline of folklore. So he kind of starts with that. And then he gets more nuanced and talks about a little bit more specifically as he goes through. And like I said, this isn't even the entire thread. It's a bit longer than this, but I just wanted to kind of give you some examples of what people do. And like I said, this is great too, because each of these actually can stand alone as its own tweet without it being part of the thread. But as a thread, it works together a lot better. So he's got that really down where he can kind of do both. I am not that talented. I will show you some of mine. What I tend to do is number mine, just so that if someone sees one and they're like, what the heck is this? They know that it's part of a larger conversation. And I think that's better too, especially if you're talking about a lot of different things. And in this is one of my friends actually tagged me in something and was like talking about medical folklore. So I like jumped on it immediately because I was like, oh, I have a lot to say. And I knew that it was going to be stuff that would be kind of all over the place. So I was like, okay, I'm numbering this. And so I started numbering it so that if people found it, they could be like, oh, okay, this connects to something else. You don't have to do that. I tend to do that just because I know me. So that's why I tend to do it. But if you're good like Jeff is, you don't have to do it. And so in short, basically, Twitter can be what you want it to be. And I really want to emphasize that. It's a really useful tool for engaging and getting folkloristics out there. And it takes practice, right? So you're not going to have like perfect tweets right away. The good thing is you can delete them. The bad thing is they don't let you edit. And I really wish they would let you edit tweets, but they don't let you edit tweets. You have to either delete them and start all over again, or you just leave it up. So sometimes you make a mistake mid-thread, you got to just leave it there unless you want to delete that, or depending on how the order works and everything. So it takes practice though. So like, don't stress out about it. You're not going to get it right away. But get out there, look at what other people are doing. If nothing else, retweet other people. You don't have to have original content until you feel safe with making it. But just go out there and practice with it. And if it doesn't work, just delete it. It's fine. So as we kind of mentioned at the beginning, all of us on the Media and Public Outreach Committee, we plan on offering more workshops and webinars on various interests. We would love to hear what you guys have to say and what you're interested in. Hey, thank you.
Okay, we can open things up for questions. If folks want to post questions either in the chat window or just want to announce yourself and yeah, go for it. I need to change my screen so I can see everybody. There we go. Thanks, Jen. That helps.
Thank you. Hi, I just wanted to say I'm a Twitter newbie from 2 years or 3 years ago. And one of the tweets I tweeted was on the Taylor Swift's album, The Meaning of Folklore. And all I did was, if you want to know the real meaning of folklore, check out this book, Meaning of Folklore. And then I was thrilled to see that I was retweeted by the granddaughter of Alan Dundee. So I reached at least one person.
That's really cool.
That is cool. We have a question from Samantha Castleman. If you could talk briefly about the best times to post in social media, or how to identify the best times to post.
That's a hard one because I think generally speaking, East Coast time is better to go with. But it's hard to say because I think people are on Twitter at different points. And so some people do it first thing in the morning, some people do it on breaks, some people do it at the end of the day. It's really hard to know when the best time is. I don't know if anybody else has any thoughts on this. I'm more than happy to hear them.
Hi.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to chime in here and say that there's actually, I was doing content marketing for the last 2 years, almost 2 years. And this is something that, there's studies and studies and studies on. You can schedule your tweets, you can schedule your posts. There are services that will do that for you. That does interfere a little bit with the sort of honest and genuine aspect of tweeting. But, if you do want to sort of be doing this, whenever there's conversations happening is obviously a good time to be tweeting as a part of them. But if you want the more sort of scientific and evidence-based research on that, you can really easily Google, tips for social media engagement and how to, look at what they tell corporations. A couple of years ago, I think the best time to tweet was like on a Wednesday afternoon. Tuesday and Wednesday afternoon were the best time to tweet. The best time to send out an email newsletter is on Thursday, something like that. So, I don't know if those are the current statistics, but you can certainly find that stuff. It's out there. There's lots of stuff to tell you how to be an influencer. So, yeah.
I ask because I also manage like a boutique fitness workout space, and so they are very active on social media, especially on Instagram, and we're required to post a certain amount of times a day, which gets really annoying. And what we have begun noticing is that like our followers as a business, we get more reactions and more engagement around noon, but personally, like my followers, and I have a lot of the same followers, are more active at like 10 p.m. So I do think part of it is knowing your audience and knowing, who you're posting for. But yeah, there's definitely research out there, so it's good to look at.
Ben Duvall Irwin makes a good point about, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram a lot of times have analytics that you can access that shows you when your followers are more frequent online, like when they're engaging the app. That's a good way, I think, of approaching it as well. Got a question here from Joel Chapman for Andrea. He says, Andrea, I know you were attacked for, quote, capitalizing on tragedy crisis, end quote, for promoting your book during a pandemic. How do you handle tender situations like this? Do you engage or do you ignore?
Sorry, my space bar wasn't working that time. Yeah, it's a really rough one. I got called out for promoting my book during the pandemic, and I was putting it up for free. They were trying to say that I was trying to make money off of the pandemic, and it was really funny because I was promoting that it was now free. So it's like, wow, that's a vast misunderstanding of what I'm doing. But yeah, that is really sensitive, and I think you really do have to be careful with that because some people can see it as I'm trying to make money off of this, and clearly one person did. But yeah, it is, especially in the time of tragedy, and I think that's in part why I have not posted as much during the pandemic, is in part because I don't want to come off as promoting my own work. But Yeah, it's uncomfortable because I have also been trying to promote myself as, hey, I'm a teacher and I can help you other teachers with this, right? So if you want to talk about this in the classroom, I've got the tools to help you with that. And that's a really, like, that's kind of how I try to reframe it all the time, is if somebody asks me why I'm doing it or something like that, I'll say something along the lines of, I'm here trying to help other professors out, or other people. I've been online teaching for 11 years now, so I have a lot of experience with it. I'm just trying to help other people out, and this is my area of expertise. So I'm making videos, I'm trying to do things that'll help other people. So that's how I've always tried to frame it, is I'm here to help more so than I'm here to promote. But it's a weird line, because there's been a lot of times where I want to be like, hey, this news article is terrible, they should have read my book, but I don't want to come off as, like I have all the answers or something like that. So it's really hard to kind of do that.
Just real quick, I want to make a correction. Samantha, you're right. Samantha Castleman noted that analytics are useful, but often we have to be a business account in order to see those analytics. That is a great point, and that's something that I think you can do as a professional, is you can frame your own personal brand as a business if you wanted to do that. Here's a question from Nancy Yan. I originally created my Twitter for professional reasons, and it has my full name. However, I've kept it private because I'm a little fearful of trolls and randos who may want to be able to find where I live and other things. Do you have any recommendations for that?
Yeah, I was going to say, that is always the hard part, is you are putting yourself out there. And there are ways like that you can really look through your followers. You can make it that if somebody wants to follow you, you can make yourself more private. So there are different settings that you can do. And I definitely recommend that. I am actually like full open on it, and that has caused problems. I will fully say that. I've had a lot of people come after me. I tend to just ignore them because they really want that interaction. They want me to get angry at them. So I tend to ignore them because I know that's what they want. But it's hard because I do have my name. I am easily Googleable, so they can easily find my email, and I've gotten emails from people too. I have not gotten too many death threats, but I've gotten a couple. So mostly for my vaccination work. Anti-vaxxers really, really like to throw the death threats out there. But yeah, I think you have to think about your level of comfort. And I have been very lucky so far, to be perfectly honest. Most of the people who've come after me have not come after me in a public way or in a way that's been too much. But I do worry about it a lot, especially when like a lot of people were like hacking into accounts and that kind of stuff. So I do worry about that. And there are some things I won't say on Twitter. For those very reasons, and hashtags I won't use on Twitter, even though they're probably relevant, because I don't want people coming after me, and I don't want to deal with that kind of stuff. And I really hope that it never gets to the point where I do have to do anything. Like I said, I've been really, really lucky though.
Sean Galvin, did you have your hand raised, or were you just giving an affirmative? Okay. Great. So here's a question from Montana Miller. Do you ever worry about your university administration coming after you for things you post that are political? Bowling Green State University has a policy that we're not allowed to promote or condemn a political candidate or stance. I don't put my BGSU in my profile bio, but it's pretty easy to figure out that I teach there, especially as I sometimes tweet about what a disaster the COVID policy is. I blocked the provost who had started following me, and he is evil, but he may have minions who are stalking me, or students who could report me for being liberal. How careful are you about stuff like this?
I am careful, but I'm not that careful, because I also believe in being who I am. And if the administration doesn't like that, then they probably shouldn't have hired me in the first place. So I do occasionally get political. I have, speaking of the last panel I was in, I have put up stuff about punching Nazis. But yeah, I have, and I actually strongly supported the movement. We had a hashtag shutdown ECU. And I strongly supported the students about that for COVID, because I did think it was the right thing to do. I have had a couple of I've had a couple of phone calls. I have not gotten into too much trouble, but nothing major because I haven't, I usually don't say anything directly about the university. I will say something very generally about the university, like universities should, or universities should consider, or, you know, the administration should think about. So I don't necessarily like go for the throat in those cases because I am aware that I have a job and I would like to keep it. So I do kind of watch that stuff, but at the same time, like I said, I did promote like the shutting down the university. I did promote some other stuff. Weirdly enough, when I made the comment about the, you know, and I just put this out there kind of jokingly, I was like, hey, if anybody like needs to talk about COVID and sex with demons, I'm your person. And weirdly enough, my research office retweeted that. So I was like kind of shocked. I was like, okay, ECU research, that's cool, I guess. I was kind of making a joke that I could talk about both of these things. And they actually retweeted me. And I was like, okay, so maybe some people at the university are cool. So sometimes it all depends on who's running the account too. So I think in our case, our higher ups are not looking at these accounts ever, like someone else is running them for them. So I'm a little bit safer than like Montana probably is, where it seems like the provost is actually running his own account.
I think
Can I pop in with a verbal comment?
Oh, absolutely, please do. I was gonna say, I think we caught up with the questions in chat, so go ahead.
Oh, I wanted to, I'm a graduate student at Memorial, and I've been running a folklore newsletter for 2 years for writers. And it comes out once a month on Folklore Thursday. And I think I follow you, Andrea, on Twitter. And a couple of things that I have found helpful, and I just wanted to offer them as suggestions. Because I have a named project that I'm working on, I use the hashtag for that name. And my folklore project is folklore and fiction. And so I will hashtag every post that has to do with that project, folklore and fiction, so that if people are interested in it, they can find all of them at once. So that's one thing that I do that I have found helpful. And the other thing I do, and it's a little service I want to recommend to people who are creating content for services like Instagram, is a site called Canva, CANVA.com. And that allows you to essentially create memes. And I, twice a month, in addition to putting out the newsletter, like if I'm talking about child lore, which was the last one I put out, I'll put out 2 memes in the month on a Thursday, where one of them is just a little chunk of information about child lore, and then 2 weeks later, I'll do another little chunk of information about child lore, but it's a visual thing. It's done as a meme. And so I just wanted to recommend that, especially for Instagram, which is very visual. So anyway, I just thought I'd share those 2 things.
I wanted to piggyback on that and also point out again with hashtags to keep in mind how they read. So you might pick a few words or an acronym and splice them together, and you know what that means, but they might read very differently to someone who doesn't. So a famous example, Susan Boyle, who won Britain's Got Talent, I think. When her album came out, she did hashtag Susan's album party. But if you actually look at that, it's got the word anal in it. So she was ripped apart by social media for that. And so just be mindful of what your hashtags look like, and also keep in mind that other people may use them. So for instance, Andrea and I alluded to this, but when Taylor Swift's album came out called Folklore, a lot of people were using the hashtag folklore for nothing to do with how we would use the word folklore. So you'll even notice in some of Andrea's screenshots, was taken to branding certain words based on current events. And so the word folklore on Twitter is branded now for Taylor Swift. So when you use hashtag folklore, there's a little TS next to it. So just keep in mind that the hashtags you use may be leading to other things as well. And that's also an issue. So if you want to tag AFS, for instance, during the annual meeting, to look at what other hashtags people are using, because AFS can mean any number of things. So I think there's a very specific AFS, AM, and then the year. So just something to be mindful of with hashtags.
Yeah, we got confused with the, I think it was the American Fisheries Society or something like that for a while. Like the first time I think we were really doing Twitter, I think we had like AFS, whatever the last two digits were at that year. And it was like the same as the American Fisheries something. So it was pretty funny.
Other questions that people might want to vocalize just with their mic?
I was just wondering, so anytime you use the hashtag folklore, it's always going to be referring to Taylor Swift then?
I'm taking it back. I'm like, I'm hashtagging. I'm either going to get all the Swifties on my side or like, that's what I'm doing. I'm taking it back. So I just keep doing it. I'm like, whatever, like all these Taylor Swift fans are going to be like, who is this woman?
She's giving the hashtag, so.
She's giving the Folklore platform free publicity.
Yep.
I'll add real quick. So I was working with AFS on when all that was going on with the social media, and we were just sitting around, and Andrea and Jen, we all got together with Meredith and Lorraine and Jessica and just thought about like, how can we respond to this in a way that's positive, but also that reflects that, hey, we're a discipline, we're out here doing work, and you know, look at us too. And we came up with some pretty good ones though. I thought like we had a lot of fun sort of strategizing around that response.
That was really fun. And actually one of my more popular tweets was, you know, I didn't think I'd end up in an emergency meeting about Taylor Swift today, but here I am. Does anybody have any other questions or thoughts? Or suggestions? I'm open. Oh, I forgot to mention too, for people who are doing readers, so if people are blind and they're using a reader, if you hashtag things and use capital letters, it actually makes it easier for them to hear and understand it, or else it just turns into like a blurb of letters. So if you do like, you know, Folklore Thursday with the capital F and the capital T, it actually will say Folklore Thursday instead of as one giant word. So that's just something to keep in mind for that as well.
There's a question in chat, and I think it was answered in chat, but just in case. So what happens after you use the hashtag? It goes into an archive and people can look it up?
They can, yeah, absolutely. And I know that the American Folklife Center is keeping track of some hashtags, including the ones for AFS. And I know that, oh gosh, we should talk about the Digital Folklore Project too. Actually, I don't know if Lynn is here. I think she might be in another session right now, but maybe somebody else from the Digital Folklore Project is here because they can talk about their use of hashtags. No,
I'm here. This is Lynn. I'm just not on screen. Hi. Yeah, so we use hashtags. I mean, in the way that all Twitter does. Technically, Twitter archives itself, but it can be really hard as years go by to find old things. So we try and take the trends that we find and that our crowdsourcing affiliates find and get them in the Fife Folklore archives and make sure that they remain viable and findable sort of through the higher order archiving of an actual archive rather than sort of the, you know, folk vernacular archiving that the internet does with itself. It is a losing race. You're always going to be behind when you're trying to track digital information. It's just it's a frustrating thing, but you know, we use the hashtag digital trend of the year when we tweet out stuff that we want to be able to keep track of. And it really is, I mean, you use a hashtag and it becomes this affiliation marker where other people who sort of want to say, I want to know what this, you know, what community is built around this concept. it's almost like becomes like a framing device that lets people understand, you know, how you're using your stuff. And I saw in the chat the note about, you know, make sure that you're using hashtags that aren't already taken by someone else. That was a hard one for the Digital Folklore Project. Digital Trend of the Year is clunky, but any shortening of it we tried to come up with was already in use by someone else. And so it's just a, you know, a good thing to be aware of.
Thanks, Lynn.
I wanted to note a comment in chat. I think it's really important. My notes also on most platforms, when you post photos, you can add alt text for people who are blind or have and I wanted to note, so on Twitter, manually adding text is hard because you have a limited count, but I believe on Twitter, when you add a photo, you can add a caption, I think. So that would be your place to describe the image. On some platforms where you have unlimited character count, like Instagram or Facebook, yes, it has become the trend that below your caption, you can manually type a description of the picture. So if someone's using an app reader, it'll read what the picture is depicting. And that's definitely an important addition. My organization needs to be that, but it's an easy thing you can add to your caption to create that accessibility.
And that's, I'm also going to encourage everyone who's making videos to make sure you close caption your videos. YouTube does it automatically, but you need to go in there and double check it, especially if you're like me and you have a weird accent and you talk about horror a lot. It comes up a little different in there. So yeah, I've had to go through and make some changes to some of my YouTube videos because I wanted them to be accessible in the first place, because I know also a lot of my students are around other family and they just want to read the captions instead of actually listening to it. So that came up and then I started checking them and I was like, oh, hey, I actually stopped doing the Canvas one because we can also insert straight into Canvas. And I stopped doing Canvas because it actually got my accent less than YouTube did. And I also like the controller for my videos too, to have them on my YouTube channel. But that's something else to think about if you are posting videos, to make sure that they're closed captioned.
Feel free to continue with questions, but I also wanted to note, again, this committee is ongoing. So are there other platforms you would like us to highlight through webinars or maybe specific topics surrounding social media? Feel free to post that in the chat, or, you know, we're a relaxed group here. Feel free to unmute yourself.
If anybody wants to experiment on Discord, there's a chat room that we've created through Folkwise, which is a YouTube channel that several folklorists and I host. And this chat room is primarily used for the channel, but we've created specific areas for like kind of recreating a public chat space for people to come in and out of, sort of to supplement the kind of like panel specific conversations that are happening in the Zoom chat with the outside. We're like, imagine yourself walking on the way to the restroom mid-panel, and over there you see a friend you haven't seen in so long and they've just posted a chat in our Discord. That's what we're trying to do with it. So if you want to experiment, you can join there. There's a video chat option that we can use for after hours parties. You can kind of hop in and out. It's not connected to a specific Zoom panel, so you can sort of continue conversations there that you're having with people. You can also directly message individuals on there as well. So if you're having a conversation with somebody in a panel and you're like, wow, this is really cool, too bad the Zoom call has to end, you can continue it on Discord through this medium if you'd like to. So if you want to experiment, feel free to join. Check it out.
And this is all being recorded and put on YouTube?
No. It is specifically staying on the Discord. It is not in any way going on YouTube. We're not using the data for anything. It's just to have people chat. That's all.
Okay, that would make it easier to have conversations then.
Yeah, it's not part of a video. It's just like a connection. It's just like another social media platform, basically, for us to connect in a different way.
It's similar in a lot of ways for those who are maybe are familiar with Slack or Microsoft Teams. It functions a lot of the same ways, but just to reiterate from the beginning, like I mentioned at the beginning, Discord was actually a platform designed originally for gamers, so, you know, who were playing games online together as a way to talk live at the same time or share content through images and text, but it's been expanded and co-opted by a variety of groups. And the key thing with Discord, sorry Daisy to add on, is that each community has a separate server. And so when you're joining Folkwise, you're not necessarily joining other communities on Discord. So if there are other communities, you can be a member of multiple servers at any given moment. You can even create your own server. I have a server that I use just with friends. But so Folkwise your audience will only be other members of Folkwise.
And I update the link often. The link that's in the chat is available for 1 day and up to 50 people signing in. So that way it's not like if somebody shared this link on Twitter, all of the universe could join. It's a much more limited, controlled environment. So I don't know if that makes you feel better or not, but we're monitoring the chat. And there's also several moderators on there too. So if something happens, if you need to say like, hey, somebody sent me a weird thing, you just @moderators, we can intervene. Like you can @me personally, I'm totally fine with that. Yeah, just we want it to be a cool, positive space for us to hang out and party.
Hi, can I mention something?
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, so I belong to Delhi, India, and I am working on a nomadic blacksmith community, the Gadia Lohars. Here in India, I have my classmates working on different ethnic groups from different geographical locations in India, which ranges from Rajasthan to Himachal. So, deserts, mountains, and everything in between. And the communities that we are working on are living their folklore. So it's not just what we study about, we see those people living that every day, which is very fascinating and very interesting to study about. So since all of you are already working towards joining and connecting folklorists together, if we could find a means to even connect the people or the folklore informants, I think my network is bad. Yeah, so if you could connect people and, make them reach out to the broader academic sphere, I think it would be very amazing.
Absolutely. And my connection's cutting out. So Andrea, jump in if I lose it. Yes, I think a lot of folklorists specifically use it to connect with their informants or artists, especially public folklorists. And actually, I use specific hashtags meant for reaching other artists and informants who are on social media. So for instance, like Arkansas folk music, since I'm in Arkansas. So it's definitely, I think that's a really good point. The key, as you've noted, is that your informants and artists will have to have that access to social media as well. But certainly social media, our audience isn't just our society and other folklorists, it's the public as well. It's a good point.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think we should definitely be reaching out more to people and trying to, and that's what I try to do, is educate everyone about folklore.
Yeah, because what I noticed was that I have been working on the community since past 3 or 4 years, but when it comes to the social acceptance, they are sidelined. So they're not included in the social order and the quote unquote mainstream. They are at the peripheries. So there becomes this disjoint between the two, because I have been working on them and trying to get them to the academic sphere, but in reality, they are out of every possible space that a person could think about. So that gap needs to be bridged, and I guess as folklorists, we can take a step towards it.
I'd also like to point out that I think a good webinar I'd like to suggest is actually not just using social media as folklorists reaching out, but also how do we do research social media. So for instance, I'm actually part of, speaking of, a Discord server for a particular community that I am doing some research with. And I've had to reach out to fellow folklorists about sort of the methodology of citing someone, you know, who's willing to share, but in a platform where, for instance, they don't use their real name, and, you know, technicalities around that. So part of it is reaching out to our informants through social media, but part of it too is meeting people through social media and doing that research. I think could be an interesting.
I think, oh, sorry, go ahead, Lauren, sorry.
Yes, no, so something I was just thinking about here is, you know, what are sort of we as a community possibly doing to reach out to international platforms that may not be the ones that are dominant in the US? Like, I'm not on either Twitter or Weibo, but I'll probably be breaking down and finally getting a Twitter after this panel. But, you know, Twitter is banned in China and people use Weibo instead. So, like, sort of just, is that something we're considering trying to work with our Chinese colleagues on, trying to reach out about things like that? And, you know, I'm sure there are different examples in other countries where there are different dominant modes of using social media.
Absolutely, it's a good point. And there's also even concerns there because you mentioned Weibo, but there's also WeChat, which you may have heard in the news. It's the most popular ways to stay in touch in China, but it is now, I believe it's soon, if not now, you can no longer download it from the App Store in America.
Right.
And that poses problems for people trying to also, you know, reach friends and family and colleagues in China who can't use things like Twitter. I think that would be an interesting future session because there's also, there's all kinds of different platforms depending on your country. There's Kakao, I'm probably saying that wrong, Talk for Korea, very popular in Korea. There's Viber, which is really popular in Eastern Europe and the Balkans and here. So yes, there's all kinds of platforms out there. Part of that is, who do you want to reach? Being mindful of privacy concerns. But I think that definitely could be a specific webinar in the future. If there's enough interest in specific international platforms, maybe we can bring in scholars who use those platforms more really to talk about them.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'm going to drop my contact information. It was on the slide and it should be on the handout, which I'm going to post the handout one more time, but I'm also going to type my email address in here. So if you have any suggestions, for instance, like that, please, at any point, any kind of suggestion related to social media where you'd like to see some sort of training, whether that's a guide that we create or a webinar, or we bring in experts, please let us know.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's it's a good point. I forgot to mention that, but yes, the platforms we use in the United States are not necessarily what people are using in other countries or ones they have access to.